The restaurant was warm, softly lit, and full of quiet laughter, but the moment Daniel Carter stepped inside, his heart stopped. For a few long seconds he couldn't breathe. His hand tightened around the small bouquet he had nervously bought on the way there. Every sound in the room faded into a dull hum. His mind told him to turn around, to walk away, to pretend he had never agreed to this blind date. But his feet stayed frozen to the floor. Because sitting at the table by the window, waiting for him, was the last person he ever expected to see again. And in that moment, Daniel realized that some parts of the past never truly stay buried. Before we dive into this emotional story, take a quick moment to support the channel. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of human connection, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, comment below where you're watching from, and subscribe to the Kindness Chronicles. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world that compassion still exists. Daniel Carter had never imagined that his life would turn out this way. 5 years earlier, he had been a man with a simple, comfortable dream. He worked long hours as a mechanic at a small neighborhood garage in a quiet town outside the city. His hands were always stained with grease, but he wore those stains like a badge of honor. He believed in honest work, in building things that lasted, and most of all, in family. Back then, Daniel had a wife named Laura and a tiny daughter named Sophie who had just learned to walk. Their little home was filled with the smell of coffee in the mornings and the sound of Sophie's laughter echoing down the hallway. Life wasn't perfect, but it was full. Then everything changed in a single night. Laura had been driving home from work when a careless driver ran a red light. The accident was sudden, violent, and unforgiving. By the time Daniel reached the hospital, the doctors had already done everything they could. Laura was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Daniel had ever known. The house that once felt alive suddenly felt enormous and empty. Toys still lay scattered across the living room floor, but the laughter that once filled the space had disappeared. And in the middle of that silence stood Daniel, holding his 2-year-old daughter in his arms, trying to figure out how to become both father and mother overnight. The early years were the hardest. Sophie woke up crying many nights, calling for the mother she could barely remember. Daniel would sit beside her small bed, gently rubbing her back until she fell asleep again. He learned how to braid hair by watching online tutorials at midnight. He packed school lunches that were often messy but made with love. He attended every parent-teacher meeting, every school play, every soccer practice. There were nights when exhaustion pressed down on him so heavily that he wondered if he could keep going. But every time Sophie smiled at him with her big brown eyes, he reminded himself that giving up was never an option. Daniel lived his life in a quiet rhythm: work, home, Sophie, repeat. He avoided dating, avoided conversations about moving on, avoided anything that reminded him of the life he had lost. But the people around him noticed the loneliness. At the garage where Daniel worked, the other mechanics often joked that he was the most stubborn man they had ever met. One of them, a cheerful older mechanic named Marcus, had watched Daniel struggle for years. Marcus believed that everyone deserved happiness, especially someone who had carried so much pain without complaining. One afternoon during lunch break, Marcus leaned back in his chair and studied Daniel carefully. Daniel sat at the workbench eating a sandwich while scrolling through pictures Sophie had drawn at school. The drawings were full of bright colors, stick figures holding hands, houses with smiling suns above them. Marcus cleared his throat. He told Daniel that it had been 5 years. He said life didn't end when tragedy happened. He said Sophie deserved to see her father happy again. Daniel didn't respond. He simply shrugged and continued eating. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. Over the next few weeks, Marcus kept bringing up the idea of a date. Not anything serious, he insisted. Just dinner. Just a chance to talk to someone new. At first Daniel refused every suggestion. Then one evening, Sophie asked him a question that quietly shattered the walls he had built around his heart. They were sitting on the living room floor coloring pictures together when Sophie looked up and asked him why he was always alone. Daniel tried to laugh it off, but Sophie's small voice continued. She told him that her friend Lily had a mom and a dad who both came to soccer games. She asked if maybe one day someone could come with them too. The innocence in her question broke something open inside Daniel. A few days later, he walked into the garage and told Marcus he would consider the blind date. Marcus nearly dropped the wrench he was holding. Within a week, the plan was set. Marcus had a friend who worked at a community center. Apparently, there was a woman there who had also been through a difficult past. She was kind, patient, and loved children. Daniel agreed to meet her at a small restaurant downtown. And now, standing at the entrance of that restaurant, Daniel felt his entire world tilt. Because the woman sitting by the window was Emily Dawson. The name alone sent a wave of memories crashing through his mind. Emily had been Laura's younger sister. 5 years earlier, during the chaos and heartbreak after Laura's death, Emily and Daniel had slowly drifted apart. At first, grief had connected them. They had spent long nights talking about Laura, remembering her laugh, sharing stories about the woman they both loved in different ways. But grief can be complicated. Emily had eventually moved away to another city to start over. Daniel had buried himself in work and raising Sophie. Over time, their contact faded until they barely spoke at all. And now, somehow, fate had placed them across from each other on a blind date. Emily looked up at that exact moment. Her eyes widened with the same shock that Daniel felt. For a moment neither of them moved. The restaurant noise faded into the background as years of memories rushed between them. Emily looked different now. Older, perhaps a little more tired, but there was still the same kindness in her eyes that Daniel remembered. Daniel slowly walked toward the table, his heart pounding. The situation felt impossible, almost surreal. Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them had planned it. Yet somehow life had brought them back to the same moment. They sat down, both unsure of what to say. For the first few minutes, the air between them felt thick with unspoken history. But something surprising happened as the evening slowly unfolded. Instead of awkwardness, there was understanding. Instead of discomfort, there was familiarity. They spoke about Sophie first. Emily's face softened when Daniel showed her recent photos. Sophie had grown so much since the last time Emily had seen her as a toddler. Emily admitted that she had thought about Sophie many times over the years. Then they spoke about the past. Not in painful detail, but gently, carefully, like people touching fragile glass. Emily shared how leaving town had been her way of surviving the grief. Being surrounded by reminders of her sister had been too overwhelming. Daniel admitted that he had often wanted to reach out but didn't know how. As the hours passed, something unexpected began to form between them. Not romance, not yet. But something quieter, something built from shared loss, mutual respect, and the strange comfort of being understood without explanation. When Daniel finally returned home that night, Sophie ran to the door to greet him. She immediately asked how the date went. Daniel paused for a moment before answering. Then he smiled. He told her that sometimes life surprised you in ways you never expected. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Emily continued to meet. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks in the park while Sophie played nearby. Emily never tried to replace Laura. Instead, she honored her memory. She spoke about Laura often, telling Sophie stories about her mother that Daniel himself had forgotten. She helped Sophie plant a small garden in the backyard because Laura had loved flowers. Slowly, gently, the empty spaces in Daniel's life began to feel a little less empty. Healing didn't happen overnight. There were difficult moments. Memories that still hurt. Questions that didn't have simple answers. But there was also laughter returning to the house. And one evening, As Daniel watched Emily helping Sophie water the garden while the sun dipped below the horizon, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He realized that love doesn't always disappear when someone leaves this world. Sometimes it simply changes shape. Sometimes it grows into something new. Sometimes it returns when you least expect it, disguised as a second chance. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that kindness and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need a little hope today, comment below with a red heart if you believe that love and healing are always possible, and subscribe to the Kindness Chronicles for more stories that remind us how powerful compassion can be.